Hello, everyone. My name is Ned Dennison. I'm the chairperson of the Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. We have recorded 200 plus interviews over the last few years. And the last couple of interviews have been with marathon swimmers who have had slightly different experiences with training and very different experiences with coaching. And part of the purpose of that is to just expose that there's not one size fits all in all of these things. So we've got our third swimmer on. I'm going to ask her to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Eva Buzo.
Eva, tell us about your level of swimming and water polo, kind of up to age 20, just a kind of a highlight.
Yeah, so look, I'm Australian, and we're in the water from day dot, and I was a big swimmer on all levels. I was a member of a surf club, so did a lot of ocean swimming in the waves in Sydney. I did a lot of pool swimming, and it was my dream to go to the Sydney Olympics in 2000, which didn't happen. But I was, from a young age, I was kind of on that elite track. And then I sort of got sick of pool swimming and I moved over to water polo when I was a teenager, and I played water polo at a national level. And because sometimes when you're a teenager, you're an idiot and you don't realize the opportunity that's right in front of you. And I decided I didn't want to do it anymore. And so I kind of tossed it all away. And I didn't come back to swimming until the pandemic, when I met an amazing group of swimmers in Sydney that are coached by Vlad Mravik, with Vlad Swim. And I just fell into a dodgy crowd of marathon swimmers who had all done the English Channel and the North Channel and all these amazing swims. And once I was in that environment, it was pretty intoxicating. They were a pretty amazing group of people, and I just wanted to do it too.
So you had Coach Vlad on the deck, presumably giving you sets and sessions and drills and all of these things. And I'm guessing that from time to time he might have suggested that you kick a little harder or pull a little harder or something. Um, Tell us about the people you swam with. Did you instantly pick up sort of mentors or mini heroes, or just were these just people you wanted to beat every set because they
Uh,
were channel swimmers?
yeah, look, the group at Vlad has coached something ridiculous. Like I think he's up to 80 swimmers across the English Channel. Um, and so look, I came to this, and a lot of these people didn't swim as kids as well. It's a lot of adults, or people who have kind of, or it's a wide range of abilities that he coaches. And I kind of came to this group, and I'd never done marathon swimming before. But I've always been pretty confident in my swimming ability, and I sort of saw that all these other people had done these great swims, and I thought, well, I'm sure I could do that. But the funny thing is, the very first time I met Vlad, someone introduced me to him and said, Vlad, this is Eva. And he said, Eva, what channel are you going to swim first? And I said, ha ha ha, I'm not here to swim any channels. I'm just here to get fit. And I first joined the squad just because I wanted to get fit. But he sort of saw the crazy look in my eye that that is always there. Doesn't matter how long it's been. And eventually I felt, you're just swimming with all these great swimmers who, on the weekend are doing cool swims around Sydney, and so you just kind of get into it.
And what was the moment when you formed the dream of a marathon swim? And when was the moment you pulled the pin on it and booked it or booked your ticket or whatever? It was there a distinct moment that you can remember?
Um, Look, it wasn't, because the thing is that it was happening during COVID, and so I kept wanting to do long swims, but everything kept getting cancelled and nothing was available. And so we did a lot of informal swims around Sydney at that point. And so I think, I mean, I did my first 10K by accident just because I was swimming with someone down at Brighton. and they wanted to swim 10K, and I was like, yeah, whatever, no, sounds good, and sort of did that. And then some other people were doing a 15K swim, and I joined them for that. And then the first proper marathon that I signed up for um, was Port to Pub in 2021. And that was, for me, it was a DNF. I got pulled out 200 meters before the end because I was just too slow and I faffed around too much. And, I was so happy to be there, and it was a really nice day. And, I was chatting to my paddler, and, I wasn't a very fast swimmer at that point. And so, yeah, I was 200 meters from the final kind of shoot, and the authority boat came over and they said, sorry, it's all over. And that was it. So my very first swim was a DNF. And then I decided that I wanted to swim Lake Geneva. And look, Lake Geneva is it's a big swim, particularly when you're not coming from I hadn't been in marathon swimming for very long, but I sort of like sidled up to Vlad one morning and I said, oh, I think I'd like to swim Lake Geneva this year sometime, maybe. Yeah. And that was in about January. And he sort of sat there and he kind of did the calculations, and he kind of went, okay, you've got 6 months and you've been swimming this much for the last 2 years, and this is what it is. And he's like, yes, you can do that. Do it. And so then that was it. And so then I did my qualifying swim. To qualify for Lake Geneva, you need to do 18 hours of swimming over 2 consecutive days. And so I did a double Derwent. I did the Derwent River in Tasmania, and I sort of did one course of it, which is 35 kilometers. And then the next day I turned around and did it again. And I think it sort of surprised a lot of people because I'd never actually had a successful marathon swim under my belt. And the sort of first thing that I did was was the double Derwent.
It's one of the things that I'll often say is that you can't tell what somebody's capable of when you meet them or
Yeah.
when you first swim with them. And we've seen amazing performances by all sorts of swimmers all over the world. One of my favorites is a guy who's still to this day says he doesn't know how to swim. He completed the English Channel, and I remember his fiance was who wrote the story up, said something like, "Well, he's been off this cap thing for the last couple of hours. His arms are shot, his legs are shot. This is the man that's supposed to marry me and give me some children, and the only forward propulsion he's getting is the exhale out of his nose." And he went on to complete the swim. So people are capable of all sorts of things. Your coaching in Geneva was your mother. Tell us about that.
Um, Look, your mother is great for many things, but being on your support crew for an ultra marathon swim, probably not. You know, sorry, it was just, I guess it was my mum was always my main support person when I was a swimmer growing up. She was the one who took me to swimming training. She was at all my events, and and she was really wonderful at that. But then I think when you're in marathon swimming and you're adults, the sort of dynamic has changed a little bit. And I think it's taken me a few goes and a lot of inner work, I would say, to work out what type of support I need on my boat. And I think I had two, because my Geneva swim was an irregular route in the end. After 25 hours, I got hit by a headwind, and I was sort of swimming at 1K an hour, and I was 10 kilometers from the finish, but it wasn't gonna happen. And so I sort of pulled in at 58 kilometers in Hermance. And and then when I did my first attempt at Italy to Albania, I had Vlad, and then I had Val, who does I Swim Happy on my boat. And I think I on one level, I'm kind of a person who can kind of grin and bear it for quite some time, and I can just sort of tough it through something, and I just go, whatever, I just get it done. And that's generally my approach. But the problem is when you're doing these swims that are 24 hours plus, um, you you need something a little bit more, because there's a point that you are just under so much pressure, so much fatigue. And, in just both the Geneva swim and the first attempt at Italy to Albania, my sort of grin and bear it just kind of cracked. And, it was the sort of unsuccessful. I attribute the sort of the DNF on those ones to my mental state after all that time. And then what I realized is I needed to be better at communicating to my boat. I was always used to growing up having a coach who yelled stuff at you and was kind of going, keep moving, kick your legs, do this. And, I had really wonderful coaches growing up, and I respond very well to that. And for me, that communicates a lot of love and a lot of care. But I just found that when I was doing these really long swims beyond 24 hours, I needed much more emotional care at a point, because you kind of go, you want to sort of be able to say to the boat, oh, this is tough. And, you don't want to be like, I'm just going to do it. So, my in the Geneva swim, the dynamic with my mom of I'm just going to kind of like bang on through it, that didn't work for me. And then when I did the first Albania attempt, that also didn't work for me. And then my successful Albania swim, that went for 35 hours, and I could have kept going as long as I needed to, but I sort of had learnt how to communicate with my support crew.
Yeah, I think everyone wants different kinds of support. I know people who've done the English Channel who say, just leave me alone. I'm going to slog it through. I don't
Yeah.
need any information. There are other people that've got a whiteboard. Auntie Bessie's sending their best regards. The situation in Ukraine is improving. Trump has said something a little unusual today. I remember a crew that I did where I got the written permission to lie to the swimmer.
Yeah.
And uh, and some people respond to being lied to. Other people, it drives them absolutely nuts.
Yeah.
So I think you have to find the crew that works for you. I think if I could define an ideal crew, I might say it's the person who coached you full time. Now, a lot of swimmers don't have that. I would say it's also your number two person has been on that same route as a swimmer and as a crew 4 or 5 times. So they know something about the currents. And they also know the boat pilot. Some boat pilots are more communicative than others. Some boat pilots don't like getting tough questions. So if their support crew knows the boat pilot, it can help. And the third person is there to make sure that if somebody gets seasick or takes ill, they can fill in. And their job is to, fill the bottles up with hot water and make the mix and a few things like that. Ava, you also made an interesting move as you got more and more experience in the sport. You started to look inside yourself and determine what the best kind of training was for you. Talk to us about that journey and not necessarily that it's going to be the same for other people, but the kinds of thought processes you went through.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think because I came from a background in swimming, and you were sort of talking about this before we started recording, just a bit about the experience, and I always refer to it as the miles in the shoulders. I think there's like I grew up swimming 10K a day for 7, 8 years. So there is just the way my body is built, and there is a muscle memory to my body about swimming that, even when I wasn't I had about 20 years out of the water, but even when I wasn't doing any training or anything like that, I could still bang out a 5K if I wanted to at any time, right? Like there's a sort of an experience that you have when you've come from a swimming background. And I wanted to kind of explore some, because I wanted to do these really long swims. I wanted to explore new ways of training for it, because frankly just doing high volume doesn't appeal to me, and I really wanted to look at how I could engineer my body to be as efficient as possible for long periods of time. And so when I had my first unsuccessful Italy to Albania swim, I walked away and I kind of went, all right, that method of preparing doesn't work for me, doing kind of high volume. I'm just going to kind of try something myself. So I did move away from coaching, but I'm also a prolific consumer of swimming information. And I love everything about swimming. I listen to every podcast. I read. I watch it. I do. I'm watching swims all the time. Like, I'm kind of constantly engaged, and I really wanted to kind of explore this area, sort of similar to Cam McAvoy, who is the Australian sprinter who won gold in Paris, and I'm pretty sure he won gold in Tokyo as well. But his method of training was kind of looking at, swimming is in essence a strength sport, and it's about how much strength can we move through our technique. Now in 50 meters sprinting, that's obviously a very different question for a 90-kilometer swim. But I was sort of taking the principles that he's looking at around strength and going, how can I make every stroke that I do as cheap as possible, right? As it's costing my energy system absolutely nothing every time I take a stroke. How do I make my technique as efficient as it possibly can be? And how do I make my catch as strong as it can be, so that when I'm just pulling water, it feels like nothing, but I'm pulling my body through the water very efficiently, very tightly, and at a very reasonable pace. And so I really kind of I dropped my volume significantly, and I generally adhere to the 80-20 principle, where you do 80% of your swimming at a low intensity, and then you do 20% at a high intensity. I think everyone needs to do a bit of high intensity swimming. You need to kind of challenge your metabolic system and get it moving for your overall fitness, and to prepare for the variety of conditions you might be confronted with. I mean, just as a kind of swimming story, when I did a swim in Colombia last year, from Huanchaco to Buenaventura, which was a route that no one had swum before, and it was 40 kilometers, and it was a tidal swim, because I had to kind of ride the tide around and then I had to kind of catch it as it turned into the bay. And for some reason, we looked up we got the time wrong of the tide changing, and I was flying. I was going at like 6 kilometers an hour down the sort of final chute, and it was wonderful. And it was just like, I'm going to kill this. But then the water just changed direction, and it was not a slow moving body of water. And I was about 5 kilometers. No, it wasn't 5 kilometers. I was about an hour from finishing, and so I was super close. But I was suddenly swimming against a current that was taking me in the opposite direction. And so they had to kind of navigate me over to the very edge of the bay, where I was sort of almost kind of like in the mangroves area. But that's where the sort of current was the weakest. And the amount of strength I had to be putting through every stroke to battle against this current was huge. So you do need to prepare for you know, increasing your intensity as you swim. But the other kind of big thing that I changed was my nutrition. And I started working with a nutritionist at the Australian Institute of Sport, Dr. Louise Burke, whose specialty is fat adaptation in endurance athletes. Now, she was the nutritionist for the Australian Olympic team for 5 consecutive Olympics, and she has the Order of Australia. And I was aware of her work, and I sent her an email one day, and I said, "Look, I do these really long swims, and I just don't think I'm getting feeding right because I just don't need to consume carbs at the rate that my current nutritionist is telling me." And that was the sort of standard advice, which was 50 grams of carbs every hour. And I was sort of chugging all these carbs, and you get told you have to do it even if you don't feel like it because you're going to bonk and all of these, you know. And it wasn't working for me. And when I did my own swims, when I was just kind of messing around, like when I did the first 10K, I could do that without feeding. You know, I found that when I was doing training swims, I could swim for long periods. I could do 5 hours without feeding. It wasn't a problem for me. And so when I wrote to Louise and I said, you know, like, I swim for 24 hours, the carbs are not working for me. I think I can do it without. Your work is very interesting. You know, could we do something together? She wrote straight back to me and she said, yes, let's do an end study on you. It sounds like you oxidize fat very well and da 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 da. And so I started working with her and I eliminated carbs from my diet. And, you know, the theory was and is that, you know, when you're swimming these long swims, you're not swimming at a high intensity, right? You're not swimming in heart rate zone 5 at your max heart rate. You're swimming in around zone 2 or zone 3. And your body burns carbs. Your body sort of, when your body is at rest, it's predominantly burning fat for energy. And as you increase the intensity of your activity, it'll start burning a greater proportion of carbs to fat, to when you get all the way up to, you know, your max heart rate zone, when your body is just burning carbohydrates or burning glycogen, because, you know, you need a super efficient and easy to use fuel source. But the theory that we worked on was because these long swims were, you know, at a lower intensity, then we could train my body to be more efficient at burning fat as an energy source rather than carbohydrates. And so I eliminated carbs from my diet, which can be appalling for some people, but it worked very well for me. And so essentially, I trained my body to be fat adapted. And since for 2 years now, I've been fat adapted. And when I did my Italy to Albania swim, the successful one, I swam the first 24 hours without any carbohydrates at all. I got in the water with no carbohydrates in my body. I hadn't had carbs for, you know, like I live a life where I don't eat carbs. And I sort of, you know, take my ketones to make sure, where it's like a little blood test to make sure that my body is burning ketones, which is when your body is using fat stores instead of glycogen. But I did the first 24 hours. And then after that, I was, you know, I was feeling a bit sort of like grumpy because I'd been in the water so long. And so I sent a message out on social media and I said, if anyone is nearby with a boat and wants to bring me some gelato, I could really go some gelato right now. And a couple of hours later, 3 guys in a boat showed up and they had a tub of ice cream. And so I like scooped it out like a bear eating honey and just like lay back and I just like was eating it, just like dripping down my face. And it was the most glorious feeling in the world to go from being, you know, carb deprived to then suddenly having ice cream. And it just kind of gave me the boost that I needed for the next, you know, I mean, the swim went for 35 hours, so another 10 hours of swimming. So yeah, and then, you know, I did my Columbia swim without carbohydrates, but like, you know, this was all sort of part of my process of exploring what worked for me. And, you know, I'm really happy with how I'm swimming now. And it sort of feels very, yeah, it feels really good for me.
All right, so thank you very much for your time and your insights. We've presented now 3 different types of training for these marathon swims. There is no right answer. Everyone has a different situation, a different experience level. If you're interested in more videos on marathon swimming, subscribe to our channel. And there are also some contacts will come up on the screen. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ned. Lovely talking to you.